Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about the Haksonian Empire, a very obscure yet important empire nonetheless that played a role in early 8th era Achrian history. We're going to talk about its rise and its fall. This is a quickly oversimplified video, but it'll give a good introduction to the Haksonians. So the Haksonians start off with a man named Dowalis. Dowalis was a slave from when he was born in the late 1000s of the Northern Era all the way up to 7 of the 8th Era. Now, Dowalis was very old by the time that he did his slave rebellion. I believe he was around his 50s when he did that. He was originally a slave of what was then called the Haksonian Empire, and then later on he was eventually in the Haksonian Empire. As the Haksonians declined in power, the Haksonians took advantage of that alongside the Amakuzi and other powers as well. It was during this political chaos that future emperor of the Haksonians would take prominence. He would rally around an army of slaves from all over the east of the continent, and eventually, in 7, he would launch his rebellion. This would culminate in the Battle of Mayas, somewhere around 11 of the 8th Era, in which the Haksonians ultimately came out on top. After this battle, the Haksonians were forced to accept the Haksonians as a separate entity. Yet, the Haksonian Empire, as it would become called, was still fairly small. Dowalis eventually decided to begin a conquest of Algamora, which lasted from 13 up till 40, the first period of conquest. There were numerous battles back and forths, with the Haksonians being able to conquer a substantial amount of Algamora. They would also conquer northwestern Mashka as well. This would be from 35 to 57 of the 8th Era, right after the death of Dowalis. Northwestern Mashka was important because it held a lot of food and the lands were very fertile. There were also a lot of people that could be used as soldiers. The attention of the Haksonian Empire was largely spent with wars with the Haksonians and the Nakarans in their first period of time. The Nakarthans, later the Kingdom of Nakara, obviously wanted to reconquer northern Algamora, so the Haksonians had to battle with them for control of the region, with the Haksonians eventually coming out on top. They would even launch a number of attacks against the Kingdom of Nakara, taking over some territory themselves. But really, their attention was spent defending against the Haksonians, who launched a number of wars in order to reconquer them. All of these wars would end up failing. Another part that took up their time were the wars with Algamora and Mashka, but the Haksonians were far more successful in these areas. Then, two major events would play that would decide the future of the Haksonian Empire. In 59, the Battle of Gemismund would take place. This battle was started because an entity called the Golden Empire wanted to conquer the region of Mashka. A number of wars took place and both sides battled, but then eventually in 54, an anti-gold league would be established, which the Haksonians joined. This would eventually culminate in Gemismund, in which the Haksonians would play a crucial role in the defeat of the Golden Empire. Afterwards, the Haksonians were emboldened by this, and they decided to go for yet another conquest into Algamora. This led to the Battle of Lecutio in 75. This battle was important because it effectively solidified Algamoran control of the east, while the Haksonians would control the west. After this crucial battle, the Haksonians would continue their wars with their neighbors, mostly with the Haksonians. Things would change 117, when the Haksonians were betrayed by a nomadic people called the Yavnamen. The Yavnamen were not friendly to the Haksonians, however, as they started to rapidly conquer territories from both sides. Two major battles would take place in which the Yavnamen would come out on top. First at Sharhul and then of Agur. These two battles were crucial because the Haksonians were heavily defeated. They were greatly reduced in territory and at many times were forced to pay tribute to the Yavnamen. They were still alive though, and even in the 180s they were able to thwart a number of Lucasian attacks, with the Lucasians being a group of nomadic people who fled from the Yavnamen wars, attempting to take over their own territories. They would eventually go into Numaraka, where they would take over the kingdom of Nakar for a brief period of time. However, as fate would have it, they would not last for too much longer. In 224, a different group of people called the Luvarians would come in and they would conquer the remnants of the Haksonians in 224. The Haksonians are a relatively obscure empire, and they do not last that long in the grand scheme of things, but I still find them interesting. For once, their name actually has an interesting story. Hak is the word for city in some nomadic languages in the eastern desertlands. The word Soni actually means slave, meaning that the Haksonian Empire is literally city-slave empire. Secondly, as I've said before, the empire was founded by a slave rebellion, which was incredibly rare, obviously, in Achrian history, and in history in general, for a major political entity to be founded by slaves. Another thing was that due to the nature of the Haksonian slave rebellion and the diversity of the regions that it held, it was also very inclusive. If you were a Narthan or an Algamorn or a Mashka, you had a fairly equal chance at rising the ranks, so to speak, versus where with other areas, let's say, for example, the kingdom of Naraka, Narthans would have a far bigger advantage than other groups, but in the Haksonian Empire, things were far more equal. And obviously, the Haksonians were still important because they played a decisive role in the fall of the Nerakunans, which led to the rise of the Yavnamen, which led to a bunch of other events that would transpire in the years to come. They were also big in the religious world, in particular of Tevarism. But that's a whole different subject, a whole different series of videos that I'm going to make another time. So that's about it. Thank you for stopping by, and if you have anything to say it in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Have a good day or night, and I'll see you all another time.